Hi, this is Heather Derome from heatherderome.ca and from the Sonatas and Partitas.com. This is a video part 2 about the Allemanda in B minor, BWV 1002. In part 1, we discussed how that Allemanda kind of fit into the general social climate, if you will, and how Bach used this movement not only to introduce that partita, but also to introduce all the partitas. And so what I'd like to talk about in this video is I'd like to talk more specifically about this Allemanda, but I'd also like to go a little bit more in depth about what was happening in Europe at that time and how this Allemanda grew out of these practices. So to start with that, I would actually like to back up about 150 years, back to Charles IX. And in the early to mid 1500s, Charles IX ordered 38 violins from Andrea Ammati in different sizes. Now these violins were probably actually ordered by Charles's mother, Catherine de' Medici, because at the time Charles was only 10 years old. Charles left the throne to his brother Henry III, who left it to his son Louis XIII. Now Louis XIII ordered from Nicolai Ammati 24 violins. Now Nicolai Ammati is the great Ammati builder. And so he has 24 of these violins, and he makes a little group called La Bande, the band, and it's Les Violons du Roi, the violins of the king. And now Louis XIV, his son, inherits this. And Louis XIV is a great patron of the arts, a lover of music, a dancer himself, and he just wants splendor and opulence and everything that we know about Louis XIV. So here he has this group of violinists, and he sends somebody to Italy to find him a musical director. Now, in Italy, that's where the violins were made. That's where the good builders were. It's where the good players were. And that's where you went if you wanted a violinist. And most courts had Italian violinists. So Louis's little envoy goes to Italy and he finds Lully. Lully is 14 years old and he's busking in the street, playing the violin, singing and dancing. He can do it all. And he goes to Versailles, and within I think about 4 years, by the time he's 18, he's the uncontested musical leader in France. So now Lully's orchestra are these 24 violins, and what he is doing in this court palace is he's writing music for the dance. He's writing music for the operas and music for the ballets. But now I just want to go on a slight small tangent to illustrate the point about how important this was to them. Looking at all these costumes and remembering that the yarn was hand spun and hand dyed with dyes that you had to dig in the ground and find the right plants for. The fabric was then hand woven. The costumes were then designed and stitched by hand, one stitch at a time. And then not only that, they were all preserved in these drawings. This in a time when history as we know it didn't really exist. People didn't really think that, oh, I'm doing this for the future. As far as they were concerned, like, for example, in Bach's day, an early music group was playing early music from 15 years earlier. So this was a very deliberate act of preservation of something that was extremely important to them. As for the violin music itself, it was really quite simple. I would say that most kids graduating out of Book 1 Suzuki are playing things that are sometimes at a bit of a higher level than what the individual orchestral members were playing in Louis's band. Now, however, when people went to France, people like Matheson or Roger North, they would go visit France and they would come back and write about it. Well, their accounts were all very similar, and it was that Lully was extremely disciplined. The bowings of his orchestra members were all very, very exacting, and also that it was very manneristic. And so the thing is that France had this sort of simple style, but no one else in Europe could really play like them. They really had their own personality. So I want to cut here and move over to Italy. Now in Italy around this time, we have Corelli. It's really too bad that these old paintings don't depict musicians actually playing, unless they were like the lower class or the peasants. Now Corelli, he was developing the sonata. We kind of take the sonata for granted, but in Corelli's day, the sonata was very new. The sonata was music that you listened to. Before that, music was either sung to or danced to. Music that you just sit down and listen to was a very novel thing. And also in Italy, what Corelli grew out of was this idea that music sounds like speech. Now, this was begun by Caccini. There's an article about this on the Sonatas and Partitas website. And so Caccini and his colleagues developed this immense repertory of musical figures that imitated speech. And they did this by going in the streets and listening to people talk, people of all different emotions, social classes, and they listened to the music in it and they wrote that down. And so these little figures, you could call them musical figures of speech, really, they were spilled into the instrumental music, and this is what Corelli grew out of. So this is the beginning of the real rhetorical period in music, where there's affect and rhetoric. Music is meant to stir the emotions, and this is what Corelli was doing. And people talk about Corelli, like how he looked when he was playing, and it's a little bit hard for us to imagine it now because his music seems fairly simple and like quite benign, but apparently his eyes were rolling in the back of his head, and you never saw anyone as disturbed as he was when he played. And this was the first real effort at making music that portrayed human emotions. Now, Lully in France had no room in his heart for that, this sonata emotion, rhetoric, affect thing. His music was to be light and gay and to support the dancers. So now I want to cut here and I want to move to Germany. Now, in Germany, there were two violinists. There was Bieber and Walter. And now Bieber and Walter were very interested in violin technique. Now, this is really an amazing thing. And Corelli also. These people inherited the violin. And it seemed like the violin had been made and nobody knew yet what it could actually do. That instrument wasn't made like out of a frustrated attempt at another instrument, and I want to be able to do this and my instrument can't do it. It's just they put a lower string on the rebec, they changed the shape, they altered the bow a little bit. And apparently in its early days, it was just played like a rebec. Sometimes the bow was used to hit the strings. It was really not a respected instrument. In his description of musical instruments, Praetorius wrote, "We all know what a violin is, and enough said." But so these people in Italy and in Germany, they actually discovered like what was possible with this instrument that was just handed to them. But especially in Germany, Bieber and Walter, they experimented with double stops. They experimented with scordatura type tunings. They experimented with making the violin sound like exactly like animal sounds. So there was like a cuckoo and I'm not sure all the other ones, but a dog. And it was to actually really imitate the sound, not the feeling that you get from being around a dog kind of thing. So this was sort of what was happening in Europe. And along comes Bach. So when Bach was born, all these people, Lully, Louis XIV, Corelli, Bieber, Walter, they were all between 30 and 55. So this is what they've handed to Bach. And in his Allemande, you can see this whole European climate at play. So on the very surface, the Allemande is a French overture, and right up to the first repeat, almost continuously, there's the double dotted rhythm. It occasionally breaks off into this little lyrical side tangent in triplets, but then it goes right back to the double dotted rhythms. But in the second half is when you can see the real affect, the music sounding like speech, the stirring the human emotions. It's extremely literal. It's extremely touching music in the second half. And also throughout the whole Allemande, like all the experiments of, especially Bieber, with the double stops. I mean, the whole thing is very, very chordal with quadruple stops. And so you can see this Allemande coming out of this whole musical climate throughout the whole of Europe. So in the next video, I'm going to discuss the actual music inside the Allemande, how it's constructed, the overall arch of the piece, the lines, the harmonies. So stay tuned for that one. If you'd like to find out when new videos are added, you can subscribe to the channel here, turn on your notification. If you'd like to buy the scores, either the full volume